Okay, so I'm going to go through paper 2, and this is the foundation paper. Starting off with population, we can see the demographic transition model here. So if you're not familiar with that, you probably want to have a little look at it again, revise it. First question, fairly simple, multiple choice. Where does total population begin to grow rapidly? It's here, stage 2, so you should have got that one. And the second question, what happens to total population in stage 5? So looking at the top here, and we know that it starts to fall, so the correct answer there. Asked about a youthful population, what is meant by that? So it is young people, but to get the second point, you've got to be specific. It's 0 to 16. Two problems that are faced with youthful populations. Well, the first one is that it's going to cost you more for education and healthcare for those young people who aren't paying for it. So they are taking out of the pot of the country's money and they're not putting in. Second one, we can relate that to, they're not paying taxes, so they're not really contributing to the economy. And also, when they all grow up, they're going to all want jobs and maybe there won't be enough. Thinking here about immigration. So explain why some countries decide to reduce levels of immigration. Well, that's probably because, and you need to give some examples here, possibly like the UK, because there's just too many people there. Maybe there's already too many migrants. Maybe there's not enough jobs, not enough resources, not enough housing, those sort of things. So generally, you've got to give specific examples of not being enough and say somewhere like the UK, which is trying to cut down because it's had maybe an influx of migration because lots of people come from the EU because they're allowed to do that, and maybe want to talk as well about how they're cutting down on unskilled people, but they want skilled people like doctors. So that's worth talking about. Next one, talking about consuming resources. So here it's a data response question. You've got to kind of look at it. Who's producing the most oil? And we can see that the answer in 2010 would be the biggest wedge, which is the Middle East. And then they ask you which region produced 450 tons of oil in 2010, but the least in 65. So you've got to, again, look at that and work out the answers. So if you've not got that right, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I want you to look again and see if you can. So identify two reasons for the change in global production of non-renewable energy. Well, these are things like it's running out, we're reaching peak oil, so this is a point where actually we've got to the maximum peak and it's starting to decline, so that would be important. It's important to focus here on non-renewables, so that's oil, coal and gas. If we look at the next question, in the future it's likely that there will be more pressure on energy supplies. Explain the pressures that could result. So in terms of economic growth, there's going to be more people who need the resources. There's going to be competition. They're going to be more developed, like India and China, so they're going to be using more resources. So economic growth, people getting more developed, is going to lead to greater consumption, and there's going to be less available, and that might make the price go up. So you need to develop your markets there. Changing international relationships, you might talk about conflicts occurring, people not wanting to trade with each other, or sanctions with Iran, or maybe talk about conflict. But if you talk about conflict, you've got to be specific and say, for example, the Gulf Wars, where there may be possibilities that people might fight over the resources, and you can talk about that. Moving on here, describe how the government can help reduce resource consumption. So it's really what strategies they can put in place and how their policies, that's the key word, what policies. So they could have a recycling policy, making sure everyone recycles. They could change their energy policy and move away from renewables. Non-renewables. A good example is like the investment that current government are trying to put into nuclear energy to try and promote that, and wind turbines and things like that. The idea of reduce, reuse, recycle, conservation policy, so putting in policies so that people can get their houses insulated, which makes them more efficient and uses less energy. So those sort of things. Maybe even things like the congestion charge in London, which encourages people to use public transport and not use their cars, thus reducing the amount of oil that we use. So that's the consumer resources. Moving over to here, it's a data response question, so you need to be able to read the information off the graph. So Germany A and Ethiopia B. If you've not got that right, look back here at the table. Suggest one reason why countries with a higher percentage of people working in secondary sectors also have a higher GDP per capita. So this is really talking that people are moving away from primary, where they are subsistence farmers producing their own food and not really having much profit, to working in a factory. Secondary manufacturing, so they have more people working there. People have more disposable income because they've got a regular wage. They're paying taxes. The government has more money in terms of taxes. And it's talking about that multiplier effect there. Outlining the factors that have helped international trade grow. Well, this is things like the internet, giving better communication, better transport links in terms of boats, which can move things cheaper, larger boats more cost effectively. We can move things quickly in terms of on planes. We can also talk about how TNCs operate all around the world, and the fact that they can move things around quickly means we can use the cheap labour in some of the developing countries. So things like that, really, they've helped it to grow, and also things like the World Trade Organization, which breaks down trade barriers. Then moving on, explain how the growth of secondary employment in developing countries, poorer countries, can bring both benefits and problems. Well, the benefits are people move away from farming, so they've got a regular income. If something like a famine wouldn't affect where they make money. Regular hours, so that's really good. They actually earn a bit more money, so they've got disposable income and can improve the quality of life and buy things. It provides tax money because people are paying tax to the country, so they can maybe provide better education in the future and healthcare to help people live longer and be better educated. But the big disadvantages, and you want to put a case study in here, you can talk about in Thailand or Bangladesh, is that working conditions are still hard, long hours, and not very much money. And there's lots of problems associated with the TNCs, maybe abusing its workers, child labour, that sort of thing. So lots of things you can put in there. Finally, moving on to in terms of the Human Development Index and development dilemmas. This first question here, correct answer is A, North America, and then B, people's quality of life. So again, look at the source, answer the questions. Describe 2 features of the global pattern of Human Development Index as shown. So we've got to see 2 things. Well, the first one is this almost north-south divide. You would get away with that. Generally, in the north, we've got higher HDI than the lower section. You might want to talk about the Brandt line that goes along here. Includes Australia, so that helps. You can't really say about east or west because that's very unclear really, because actually we refer as this area as the west and the rest is east, and actually it's not particularly east-west really, and then you've got Australia. But you then might want to say somewhere like Africa, and this will get your second point, is very low, somewhere like North America is very high. Describe the positive and negatives of a named top-down project. Well, the best one here, you've got to give specific examples, is the Three Gorges Dam. So what are the benefits? Well, it provides 10% of China's electricity, it's in a renewable way, it provides flood control, it provides fresh water, it allows boats to navigate further in, has opened up the interior of the country. What are some of the negative impacts? Well, you know, anything between 2 and 4 million people were displaced, 1,200 archaeological sites were lost, there's been large flooding of land, loss of habitats for wildlife, something like the river dolphin has almost become extinct because they've changed the level of the water and it's now too cold. So large costs, local people didn't necessarily benefit. So those are the sort of things you need to be talking about, top-down government run. And then finally, when we're looking at Rostow's development model, and really this one we have to talk about how places develop over time. So really for this one, we're thinking about the takeoff stage, and we're talking about how they the rise to development, all sorts of things like that really. I'm going to quickly, if I can find a copy of it, show you it in the book because that will help you to understand, and then you'll remember what I'm talking about if I can find it. So here, Rostow's development model, page 210. So you really need to look at that and say how we can move from one stage to another, and that would be what you need to do. So now what you need to do is look through, use your green pen, make sure that you can clearly know where you went wrong and what you need to do for a better mark.